Okay, time for the band. Here we go. Band and the collar. So your shirt is together, front, back, sleeves. I've got the two-part sleeve with cuff. Some of you may have another sleeve, but this is the point we're all at right now. So now we're going to do the band so we can prepare to put the collar on. The band is piece number 9. And there's a notch. There's a notch here that matches a notch on the upper side of the front shirt. Okay, front of the shirt. So they go like that. Okay, but first we're going to go and prep these at the ironing board. The pattern says a little bit about this, but we're going to do it a different way. So you'll be prepped so you don't have to do it when you get it stitched onto the shirt. So wrong sides together. You're going to fold it in half. The pattern piece has a center fold line. Okay, fold line right there, and it's dead center of the piece. So fold the piece, wrong sides together. So you're going to be pressing it in half on the right side. Not a whole lot of movement, just up, down with the iron. Let's do both pieces. That one. Can't hardly see. There we go. Okay. So you got the notched edges on both sides. So there's your seam down the middle. Take the unnotched edge and fold over your 5/8 seam allowance. That's the 5/8 that's going to be stitched down after you turn it on the shirt. And this is just easier to do it before you stitch it onto the shirt because your crease will already be there. And what you can do, use your seam gauge. Everybody's got one of those, right? Yep. Here's your 5/8. There. You have to mark it, that's fine. Get it started. Just fold this down. This is the unnotched edge. There's a notch on this side. You're doing the opposite side. Folding down 5/8. And then just leave it alone. Done. So we're going to do both facings like this. Number 9, they call it the band, but it's really a facing. So here's your notched edge peeking out that you folded in half, and then you took the unnotched edge and folded down 5/8. Do this one. So it's just easier to put on the shirt and have all of these folds in place. Because otherwise you would have to go to the ironing board. Okay, here's your right side. And then right sides together. Let's start to pin it on the shirt. Pin at the notch first. Go to the top edge, the neck edge, then come all the way down and pin it and stitch 5/8 seam allowance. If you have questions, you can ask. The other one, pin the notch first. All right. 5/8 seam allowance from top to bottom.
Now that we've got the front band on one side, let me show you what we did. We did the pre-folds and stitched it. I trimmed the seam down and folded it inside, then top stitched it. So it's finished and ready for buttons. So here it is. When we've pre-folded it, then I stitched it onto the shirt edge. Here was the notch right here. I trimmed the seam down because you don't want to see it in your fabric. If you have a light linen color or, you know, a white cotton, if you got something dark, you may not see it, but it's just nice not to have that bulk. So trim the seam down and then fold the facing to the inside and top stitch so you can catch both sides. And then once the two bands are on, it's time for the collar. It's time to put a collar together. This is a pretty traditional collar. You've got the collar and the collar band. Some of you, for this particular pattern, McCall 6124, you may be just doing a band where it's put on almost, we know it as a mandarin collar, where it's just the band and that's it. We're going to put a collar. In this particular example, we're going to put a collar in it. So here are the two pieces. This is the collar. Let's get a little closer. I've stitched it down the sides. This is right sides together. One side is interfaced and one side is not. So I've stitched it on three sides, the unnotched sides, the sides, across the bottom and both sides. And what I'm going to do is trim down these seams. Here's a good practice. You can see this seam. When I'm coming to a corner, I keep going all the way to the edge and I do a back stitch like right in there just to really secure it. And then when I do the cross stitch, I keep going all the way to the edge and I do back stitch right in there just so I have a really secure corner. And the first thing I do is snip right across the point. Let's do it on the other side also. Just snip right across the point. And then I'll trim down. If you think ahead, this is the side, this is the edge that you're going to top stitch. So trim very even, so when you top stitch, your stitch will lay right there, you know, on top of that seam. And depending on your fabric too. I'm using a really lightweight linen. This is a handkerchief linen. And it folds very nicely. And the top stitch will look really pretty. So I'm folding, I'm trimming it down right below a quarter. It's like almost 1/8 of an inch. If I were using a heavier fabric, maybe a flannel, I would grade these seams when I trim. I would like trim just one side down. And of course my interfacing would be heavier. And because I've trimmed that corner crosswise, it gives me a really good turn. So, and using a point turner is really helpful. And sometimes I even use a pencil so it's not so pointy. So check this out. Put your finger right there, put it on the outside before you turn it, and press your finger down and turn it and keep your finger right there. And you've got a good point. See, a blunt pencil is not as pointy that it will punch through your fabric. Right there. Hold it. And you want to go to the ironing board. If your fabric is fussy, I would go in here, go into this seam and open it and press it. So you can set that seam open and it'll be easy to fold over and press down. But there's nothing like a really nice crisp collar. So this is where it starts. Okay, so we'll go to the ironing board with that. Here's the band. Now the band has a facing, it has an outside and a facing. The outside piece is interfaced. You got your double notches at the top. And the inside piece is called a facing. And what you want to do is pre-fold and press your 5/8 inch seam allowance up. The unnotched edge, because this is how it'll be stitched, sandwiched with the collar. So this is how you prep the band. All right, we got the collar done. It's stitched, flipped, press, and top stitch. Now here's the band. I'm going to show you a tip here. The pattern pieces have notches only. They also have a center line, center back, center back. That's where the two pattern pieces match up. This is how it looks. Match up in the middle, notches, and this is how they match up. And of course the circles. Unless you transfer these lines to the center on your collar and band, you're gonna lose sight of that. You need that. So here's a tip. Just fold them in half and find the middle and put a pin. Here's your center of the collar and the center on the band that you're going to sandwich it between. Well, you can draw a line if you like, but I like doing a pin. So you're going to do right sides together, line up. You're going to sandwich the collar in between the two band pieces. Do the center first. Your notches. And then do the ends, and it's going to be right there at the curve. Now, sandwich on the band facing. Just make sure you've got an even side here. Here. Here's your notch. Here's your center. The collar is a pretty satisfying piece of the shirt because it's so precise. So your stitching is going to look like this. You're going to come up, stitch across that curve. Really important to kind of respect that curve. Keep that edge right on your guideline when you're stitching 5/8 seam allowance. and come across and do the same thing on the other side. This is folded up because when you stitch it, and this is where you're going to stitch it onto the shirt, that's going to be already folded, so it just kind of absorbs it, lays down for you, you top stitch, and you're done. So let's get this stitched, and then we'll put the collar on kind of a set. I'll show you how we do that with the pressing ham. The collar and the band is all stitched together, and I've already trimmed it down. A nice, neat trim. So before we put it on the shirt, I'm going to turn it. Make sure you got a nice curve here. You turn it and press it. We're going to set it and put it in its collar shape before it goes on the shirt. So when you put it on the shirt, it'll already be kind of in a nice curve, and the collar will have its bend and all of that. Glad I'm working with this linen because you can finger press before you go to the ironing board. As I turn it, I'm just going to lightly press it. I don't want to mess it up too much. Again, depending on your fabric. I'm working with a handkerchief linen, and it can really get out of whack if I do too much pressing. Let's see the edges. Just make sure they're turned nicely with your corner right there. And this is where you're going to stitch it onto the shirt. But before we do that, we're going to turn the collar back. Here's my ham. I'm put on a small end. I want the collar to shape very nicely, and kind of put it underneath and bring it top and put it in its shape. You're gonna need a pin. Pin right there, and then hush iron. And just want the collar to have the roll, not the seam. The seam underneath the collar. You want the collar to have that roll at the top. Not folded on the seam. So look at the collar. There you go. Pen don't want to act right. There we go. Well, I took my break for the collar to set. So, watch that. See? See how it's kind of stays put? Isn't that nice? So, now we're going to put a collar on the back, on the neckband of the shirt. You got a notch here and a notch here. And those notches match the band of the shirt. So I'm going to do right sides together. Find your middle. Let's do that again. Let's find that middle point so we can put it on that center seam. You're doing right sides together. You're going to do the center, come around and do those notches, and then do each end. And the ends line right up. There's that folded edge of the band. And here's the stitched edge of the front band. There you go. And it all should line up. And you're going to do your 5/8 inch seam allowance, and you will have a collar on the neckband ready to top stitch down the inside facing and put your white shirt on and go sit in the living room and watch a movie. That's what we've been doing for the past couple of years. Anyway, so here we go. Okay. Now here's a tip. We're back over to the ironing board. I've stitched the band on, and since you have a nice curve on this collar, you don't want to lay anything out flat again. So get your ham and put yours to press these seams open. You want to press them open and then trim it and press the seam up so you can pull down the facing. But you don't want to disturb all of the curviness that your collar has. So don't lay it out flat on the ironing board. Do your seams a little at a time on the ham, the tip of your iron. All that curvy lusciousness on the collar. I'm going to open it to set it first, and then I'm going to trim it. And after I trim it, I'm going to fold it up underneath the facing. And once I put the facing down, that's where I'm going to top stitch right on the seam. And it's done. It's time for buttons.